Sarah Brennan held her tiny daughter close as the judge's gavel slammed down. It sounded like a rifle shot in the cold January air of Caribou Creek, Colorado. Outside, the snow was falling, but inside that room, 40 pairs of eyes were sizing her up. It made her feel chilled to the bone. Little Grace whimpered and Sarah hugged her tighter. This just could not be happening. Not to a widow whose only fault was marrying into a bad family. Now, before we go on, if you believe every person deserves a fair shake, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Stay with us to see how one good man's kindness changed everything. And drop a comment to let me know what town you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories go. All right, let's get back to that courthouse where Sarah's future was about to be decided. Lot 17, the auctioneer's voice boomed. One healthy woman, aged 24, who can read and write. Skilled in running a home, a baby girl is included. Sold to settle the debts of Harold Brennan. The bidding was set to start at $15. Sarah felt faint. $15. That was less than a good horse. She was worth less than livestock because of her baby. That is not right, Judge Morrison. A woman's voice cut through the quiet. It was Mrs. Chen, the kind laundress. You cannot sell a widow like she is a piece of property. Judge Morrison's voice was as cold as the wind outside. The law is quite clear, Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Brennan was a dependent in her father-in-law's house. When he passed with more debts than money, all his property had to be sold. That includes her. She is a human being, Mrs. Chen insisted, her voice shaking, and she has a baby. She also owes 3 months' rent she cannot pay, the judge said, not missing a beat. Mrs. Patterson has kindly agreed to accept the money from this sale instead of having her arrested for theft. Sarah's legs felt weak. Patterson, the boarding house owner, who had promised to help her, stood in the corner. She wore a fancy purple dress that cost more than everything Sarah owned. The woman's eyes were hard as stone. Theft? Sarah whispered. I worked for you. I cleaned and cooked. You ate my food and used my heat, Mrs. Patterson shot back, while your baby's crying drove my customers away. You owe me, girl, and the judge knows it. $15, a man called from the back. I will start the bidding. It was Dutch Hansen, the saloon owner. The way he stared at her made her sick to her stomach. 20, called another man. It was Frank Cooper, the old mine foreman, who was at least 60 years old, hands like bear paws and breath that smelled of whiskey. 25. The bid came from a stranger. He was a thin man in a nice coat with a cold, calculating smile. Little Grace started to cry for real. She could feel her mother's terror. Sarah bounced her, whispering comforting words that got stuck in her throat. How had her life come to this? Just 6 months ago, she was a respected wife in St. Louis. Her husband, Thomas, was alive. $30, Dutch Hansen yelled, playing to the crowd. Thomas had died on a Tuesday. His father, Harold, died that Friday from the shock of his gambling debts. The creditors came down on her like a pack of wolves. They took the business, the house, everything. Sarah had run to Colorado with baby Grace, hoping to reach her cousin in Denver. She had $40 in her pocket, but only made it to Caribou Creek before the money was all gone. 35, Frank Cooper called out, his voice eager. The boarding house had seemed like a blessing. Mrs. Patterson had been so kind to her at first, so understanding. But the work Sarah did was never enough. Her debt just kept getting bigger and bigger. Then 3 days ago, the sheriff came, holding papers signed by Judge Morrison himself. The judge had declared that her debt would be paid by selling her labor contract. She would be housed by the county until someone bought her contract. Sale of contract. Such clean, polite words for such a dirty, awful thing. $40, Dutch Hansen's voice boomed. And I will take them both, the woman and the little one. He said he had rooms above his saloon that needed filling. Sarah's world started to go dark. Grace cried even louder, and Sarah pressed her daughter's face into her shoulder to shield her. She would not let this horrible scene be her daughter's first memory. 45, said the thin stranger in the fine coat with a cruel little smile. Though I do question the value of a woman with such an obvious burden. You watch your mouth, Mrs. Chen stepped forward, shaking with anger. That baby is a blessing. Then you put your money down for her, the stranger shot back, or you hold your tongue. Mrs. Chen's face fell. Sarah knew she worked 14 hours a day just to feed her own 4 children. $50, Frank Cooper's voice cut through the room. That is my final offer. I need a housekeeper. And the baby will be no trouble at all when she is weaned. Those last words hit Sarah like a punch. He was going to separate them. He meant to take Grace away from her. No, the word tore from Sarah's throat. Please, Judge Morrison, there has to be another way. The bidding is open, the judge said flatly. You have no say in this matter. Dutch Hansen grins, $60, and I will even let her keep the little one. The room went quiet. $60 was a whole lot of money. Sarah felt the walls closing in. Everybody there knew what that meant for her, even if they were too scared to say it. Please, Sarah whispered, a prayer to anyone who might be listening. And just like that, the courthouse doors slammed open, bringing in the snow and a man she had never seen. He was a tall fella, wearing a heavy sheepskin coat dusted with fresh snow. His hat was pulled down low, but she could see a strong jaw and eyes the color of a coming storm. He moved like a man who knew his way around hard country, steady and sure. Is this auction still going? His voice cut through the wind. Close that door, the judge hollered. The stranger shut the door and his gaze swept the room, stopping right on Sarah and Grace. Then he looked at the judge. It is, the judge grumbled. And who are you? Name's Daniel Frost. I heard you were selling off the Brennan property. Dutch Hansen called out. Nothing left but his daughter-in-law and her little one. Daniel Frost's jaw tightened. His hard stare made Dutch shift on his feet. I heard, Daniel said quietly. That is why I am here. Sarah's heart started to pound. The bid is $60 from Mr. Hansen, the judge said. Do you wish to bid? Daniel stepped forward, shaking the snow from his wide shoulders as he walked. As he got closer, Sarah saw his weathered skin and his calloused hands. He was not a rich man, but he was a long way from poor either. $75, Daniel said. The room started whispering. Sarah held Grace even tighter. 80, Dutch Hansen growled, his face getting red. You mind your own business, Frost. 100, Daniel's voice was sharp as a knife. The room went dead silent. A man named Frank Cooper offered 110, but his voice trembled. 150. Sarah could not believe it. Daniel Frost had not even blinked. He stood there calm as could be, his gray eyes fixed right on the judge. Now that is just crazy, Judge Morrison snapped. She is not worth that much. Do I hear 160? The room was silent. Frank Cooper just shook his head. Dutch Hansen was beet red with fury, but he kept his mouth shut. 150, going once, the judge said. Going twice. Sarah could not breathe. Little Grace's hand was balled up in her mama's shawl, her blue eyes, just like Thomas's, looking right up at her. Sold. The gavel cracked down. Mr. Daniel Frost had bought her for $150. The room buzzed with whispers. Some folks called him a fool for spending that kind of money, but Sarah did not hear a word of it. The world just faded away into a dull ringing in her ears. The stranger, Daniel Frost, walked up to the judge and pulled out a thick leather wallet. She felt like she was watching a dream as he counted out real cash money, not just promises. The judge looked over each bill, then gave a sharp nod. The sale is final, he declared. She is your responsibility now, Mr. Frost. But Mrs. Patterson just had to have the last word. She has nothing but the clothes on her back. And that baby, the woman called out. Daniel Frost turned slowly and gave her a look that could have frozen a fire. It made Mrs. Patterson take a nervous step back. Ma'am, he said, his voice low and steady, you just sold a human soul for a few coins. I would be praying for forgiveness if I were you. Her face turned beet red. Now see here, the judge warned Daniel, his voice sharp. Take your property and go. That one word, property, hit Sarah like a physical blow. Daniel's jaw was tight, but he nodded. Then he turned to face Sarah for the first time. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man. She had to look way up to meet his gaze. But his eyes were not cold or greedy like the others. They held something different, something kind. Ma'am, he said softly, I know you are scared, but I give you my word. You and the little one are safe with me. Sarah wanted so badly to believe him, but she had been hurt before. Trust was a price she just could not afford to pay again. I do not have a choice in the matter, do I? She whispered. He looked pained by her words. Not right now, he admitted. But once we get to my ranch, things will be different. You will have choices then, I promise. But Dutch Hansen's ugly voice cut through the air. You just bought a whole mess of trouble, Frost. In a flash, Daniel moved like lightning. 1 second he was standing still. The next he had Dutch slammed hard against the wall. You say one more word about this lady, Daniel whispered, his voice dangerously quiet, and you will be eating your meals through a straw. Do you understand me? Dutch's eyes went wide and he nodded frantically. Daniel let him go and calmly straightened his coat. He turned to Sarah. Pardon me, ma'am, I cannot stand for that kind of talk. Sarah realized she was shaking. We ought to go, Daniel said gently. The storm is getting worse. I have nothing, Sarah's voice cracked. They took everything I owned. Do you have a warm coat, he asked. She shook her head, having sold hers for firewood. Daniel's face grew grim. Without a word, he took off his own heavy sheepskin coat. He draped it over her. It was huge, warm, and smelled of wood smoke and something safe. What about you? She asked. I'll be just fine, he said. Come on now. He did not touch her, just turned and walked toward the courthouse door. Sarah glanced back, seeing the tears in Mrs. Chen's eyes. She also saw the pure resentment on Mrs. Patterson's face. Then she looked down at baby Grace, whose little hand was clutching the man's coat. Sarah took a breath and followed him right out into the fierce winter storm. The wind howled down the empty street, and snow was already piling up high. Only a fool or a desperate man would be out. Daniel led her to a sturdy wagon. It was hitched to 2 strong horses, the wagon bed already lined with hay and blankets. This is for you and the little one, he said, his voice loud against the wind. I will ride my horse, Buck, alongside. Can you handle the wagon? Yes, Sarah told him. She had grown up on a farm and knew how to drive. Good. Daniel helped her onto the seat, his hands steady and respectful. He then pulled a thick buffalo robe from the back of the wagon. Wrap this around you both, he said. It is going to be a cold ride. How far is it? She asked through chattering teeth. 20 miles. We might have to shelter at the Henderson place if the storm gets worse. Sarah nodded, tucking the heavy robe around herself and a now sleeping Grace. Daniel swung up onto his horse, Buck, with a practiced, easy grace. Just stay right behind me, he called out to her. If you get turned around in the snow, just follow my horse. He knows the way home. Home. That word hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. She did not have a home. She was following a man she did not know, a man who had just bought her. But as the wagon lurched forward, she knew she had no other choice but to trust him. At least, she thought, he had called her ma'am and given her his own coat. The town of Caribou Creek disappeared behind them, swallowed by the snow. Her world shrank to the sound of the wagon, the howl of the wind, and the horse leading them on. Little Grace slept on her mama's chest, a small comfort against the bitter cold. After an hour, Sarah's hands ached something fierce and her face was numb. But she kept the wagon steady, following Daniel through the deepening snow. Daniel kept looking back, giving a little wave to check on them. Those small gestures were the only thing keeping Sarah going in the white storm. Another hour passed, and the snow piled up halfway to the wagon wheels. Sarah was trembling from cold and hunger, having only eaten a piece of hard bread. It was something Mrs. Patterson had tossed at her. Just then, Daniel's voice cut through the wind. He rode back to the wagon and said, Henderson's place is just ahead. We have to stop. Sarah was too frozen to speak, so she just managed a nod. When she tried to get down, her legs gave out from under her. Daniel caught her just in time, holding her and Grace steady. I've got you, he promised. He practically carried her to a small, solid cabin that appeared through the snow. Smoke was rising from the chimney. Daniel knocked hard on the door, calling out a name. A kind-looking couple opened the door, their eyes wide with shock. Lord have mercy, the woman, Mrs. Henderson, said. Get them inside this minute. The warmth inside the cabin was a blessing. Sarah felt painful prickles as she thawed. Mrs. Henderson took the baby, her hands gentle despite her scolding tone. When did you last eat, child? She asked. Sarah whispered, yesterday. Mrs. Henderson clucked her tongue in disgust, shaking her head. She looked at Daniel and asked what in the world was going on. It is a long story, Daniel said, rubbing his arms to get warm. Well, we have hot stew and coffee, Mrs. Henderson replied, getting to work. The baby started to fuss, and soon everyone was busy helping Sarah and Grace. The next hour was a blur of warmth and food for the weary travelers. Grace ate and then fell fast asleep in her mother's arms. The Hendersons were kind and did not ask too many questions. Once Sarah had warmed up, Mrs. Henderson spoke plainly. "You cannot go on," she said. "This storm is getting worse." Daniel looked at Sarah and nodded. "They are right. We need to wait it out." She just nodded, too worn out to argue. "We've got a spare room," Mrs. Henderson said. "It's small, but it's private. Y'all can rest in there." "Thank you," Sarah whispered. Henderson led her to a tiny room. It was hardly big enough for a narrow bed, but the blankets were clean and the room was warm. Grace was already fast asleep. Sarah laid her down gently, then sat on the edge of the mattress. Through the thin walls, she could hear Daniel talking low with the Hendersons. Judge Morrison said it was legal. Then Daniel's voice, "But it ain't right. A woman's not property. I know that." "Then why do you think I bid?" After a moment, Mrs. Henderson asked, "What are you going to do with her?" "Give her a choice," Daniel said. "Once she's rested and feels safe, she'll decide what's next. If she chooses to leave, I'll give her a horse and my blessing." A choice. Sarah closed her eyes. She'd heard that before. But every choice she'd ever made had led her right to that auction block. Sold like an animal. She held Grace tight and let the exhaustion finally take her. When she woke, the cabin was dark and quiet. Confused for a second, Sarah sat up. Grace was sleeping soundly beside her. Moonlight streamed in the window. The storm had passed. Sarah stood on shaky legs and crept to the door, peeking through a crack into the main room. Daniel Frost sat by the hearth, just staring into the fire. He was in a dry shirt. His hair was a mess, like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked tired and young. Without his hat, he looked maybe 30. Too young to have that kind of money. As if he felt her watching, he looked up. Their eyes met across the dim room. "How's the baby?" he asked quietly. "Sleeping," she said, stepping into the room. He motioned to a chair. "The Hendersons are asleep. You should be too. Long ride tomorrow." Sarah sat, but she wasn't sleepy anymore. She was filled with questions. "Why did you do it?" she asked plainly. "Do what?" "You know what I mean. $150 for a woman you don't know." We thought. Daniel was quiet for a long while. He stared back into the fire. "My mother died when I was 10, he finally said, his voice low. "Childbirth. My baby sister, she only lived for 3 days. My father remarried within the year. He had to. He couldn't run the ranch and raise 3 boys by himself. My stepmother, Martha, was a widow. She had 2 little ones of her own. It was a practical arrangement. Pa needed help. Martha needed security." He gave a small smile. "But it became more. They grew to love each other, and she loved us boys like her own." "She sounds like a good woman." "She was." His smile faded. "When I was 17, my pa was thrown from a horse. Broke his neck, died right then and there." He rubbed his jaw. "That's when the real trouble started. My Uncle Lawrence came from back east and fought the will. He said Martha had no legal claim, and the judge agreed with him." Daniel's voice went cold. "Martha and her children were thrown out with nothing. The ranch my father promised me, the land I'd worked my whole life, was just gone. Handed over to a man who had never even laid eyes on the place before. That's just terrible. Martha passed that winter from pneumonia. She'd been living in a boarding house, washing other folks' clothes." He looked right at Sarah. "Her children were sent to an orphanage. I tried to help, but I was barely a man myself with empty pockets. By the time I could go for them, they were gone. Shipped east on an orphan train. I never did find them." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "I swore right then," Daniel said, "that if I ever had the means, I'd never let that happen to another woman. I would not let someone lose it all because the law said they had no rights. So when I heard Judge Morrison was selling you to pay off debts, I rode straight to Caribou Creek." "You didn't even know me," Sarah whispered. "It didn't matter. I knew the spot you were in." He held her gaze. "And I couldn't let it happen. Not again." The fire crackled in the silence between them. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely there. Daniel stood and looked out the window. "Tomorrow we ride to my ranch. It is nothing fancy. Just a house, a barn, and some cattle. I have two good men who work for me, Carlos and Miguel. You and Grace will have a room to yourselves. I will sleep in the barn until we sort things out. He spoke carefully. Until we figure out what you want. What I want? Sarah let out a broken laugh. I want my husband back. I want to have never walked into that courthouse to be sold. Her voice cracked. No one ever asks a woman what she wants. I am asking, he said gently. Sarah looked at this man who had paid a fortune for her. This cowboy who stood in a borrowed cabin, talking about choices she never thought she had. I want Grace to be safe, she said at last. That is all I have left to want. Daniel nodded. Then that is what you will have, I give you my word. Sarah Brennan, as long as you are with me, no one will harm you or your daughter. It was the first time he used her name. Why should I trust you? The question was sharper than she meant it to be, but Daniel did not flinch. You shouldn't. Not yet, anyway. Trust has to be earned, and I aim to earn it, no matter how long it takes, Ibelmer. Sarah watched his face in the firelight. She looked for a lie, for the hidden reason behind his kindness. But all she saw was a tired man who rode through a storm just to do the right thing. It hit her then. He hadn't saved her, just the idea of a woman's freedom. She was simply a problem to be solved, a debt he owed to his stepmother. I'll work to repay you, she said, her voice firm. I can cook and I can clean. That is not necessary. It is to me. Sarah stood tall. I will not be a charity case. If I am staying at your ranch, I am earning my keep. Daniel watched her for a long moment. Then he gave a slow nod. All right, if that is what you need. I do not need wages, she started, then stopped. What was it she needed? You need choices. Daniel finished for her, his voice real quiet. I understand. She wrapped her arms around herself, the big borrowed nightgown slipping from her shoulder. She felt so exposed, standing in that cabin with this strange, quiet man. I should get back to bed, she finally said. Yes, ma'am, he replied. That word stung. Ma'am, as if he had not just bought her for $150. Still, she paused at the door. Mr. Frost, thank you for what you did today. Call me Daniel, he said gently, and you are welcome, Sarah. Her heart was pounding as she leaned against the closed door. Grace was still fast asleep. Sarah slipped back under the blankets, pulling her daughter close as their lives turned a new corner. Through the wall, she heard the creak of Daniel's chair as he settled back by the fire. Outside, the storm had passed, but a different kind of chill hung in the air. A ranch, her own room, a man who promised her choices. It all felt like a beautiful dream. And in Sarah's experience, beautiful dreams always turned into nightmares. But holding Grace's tiny hand, she made a solemn promise to herself. Whatever was waiting for them at that ranch, she would survive it. She would protect her child. And she would never, ever stand on an auction block again. It meant she would have to learn to trust a stranger, to believe in a second chance. And it meant she had to find a little bit of hope that maybe this time would be different. In the other room, Daniel stared into the flames, sleep a million miles away. He had really gone through with it. $150, half of his savings, just gone. All spent on a woman and a baby he did not even know. His foreman, Carlos, would think he had lost his mind. His brother Marcus would laugh until he cried. But all Daniel could see was the face that drove him through that blizzard. Martha's on the day Uncle Lawrence had. He remembered the helpless rage of being a 17-year-old boy, watching them get thrown out. He couldn't do a thing back then, but he sure wasn't powerless now. Seeing Sarah Brennan on that courthouse floor, holding her baby so tight, while men bid on her like she was cattle, it brought all that anger right back. He had saved her. That part was over. Now he had to earn her trust. He needed to give her a safe place to heal and choose her own path. Daniel rubbed his tired eyes. He hadn't thought past the auction, he just knew he had to act. And now a terrified woman and her 3-month-old baby were depending on him. Lord, don't let me fail them, he whispered to the fire. Outside, the world was quiet and still. Tomorrow, they would finally reach the ranch. Daniel prayed his good intentions wouldn't end up hurting them both. In the other room, Sarah and little Grace were sound asleep. They didn't hear him add another log to the fire, keeping watch. They didn't know he planned to sit in that chair all night until the sun came up. Neither of them could have possibly guessed that this journey was the start of a whole new life for them all. They had both, without even knowing it, just taken their first step toward home. Dawn broke, cold and bright. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee. For a second, she was lost. Then yesterday came crashing back down on her. She ached all over. Little Grace was fussing, ready for her breakfast. Sarah quickly nursed the baby, listening to the voices in the other room. "Roads are clear enough," Mr. Henderson said. "You should make it by midday." "I'm much obliged for your hospitality," Daniel replied, "and for your silence." "We won't breathe a word," Mrs. Henderson promised. "That poor girl has seen enough trouble." Sarah's throat felt tight. She fed Grace and put on her only dress. When she came out, Mrs. Henderson handed her a basket of food. "For the road," she said kindly. "Some bread, cheese, and dried apples." "You're too thin, child," the woman added. "Thank you for everything," Sarah whispered. Mrs. Henderson gently touched her cheek. "Now you listen. Daniel Frost is a good man. His stepmother Martha always said so, but if he ever treats you wrong, if anything goes wrong, you come right back here. This door is always open." Sarah just nodded, her throat too tight for words. The ride to Daniel's ranch felt a world away from the blizzard's fury. Under the morning sun, the snowy land looked almost beautiful. Daniel rode ahead on Buck, while Sarah followed in the wagon, clutching little Grace. They stopped only once to rest the horses in the quiet cold. Daniel helped her down from the wagon, his hands firm but quick at her waist. He didn't say much, just checked if Grace was warm and offered Sarah his canteen. "How much farther?" she asked. "About 2 hours," he said, eyeing the sun. "We'll be there before noon." Sarah had more questions, but Daniel had already turned back to his horse. He wasn't mean, just distant, as if their fireside chat had never happened. She wondered if he was regretting the whole thing. Regretting the money, regretting that sudden impulse at the courthouse. Sarah climbed back onto the wagon seat. She couldn't worry about his regrets. She had to think about her and Grace, and if this new life was even real. The ranch finally appeared over a low hill. It was smaller than she expected. Just a simple house, a large barn, and a bunkhouse. Cattle were dark specks against the white fields. It wasn't fancy, but it looked solid. It looked real. Two young men came out from the barn as they rode up. Both had dark hair and stopped dead in their tracks when they saw the wagon. "Boss, that you?" the taller one called out. "It's me, Carlos," Daniel replied. He swung down from his horse. "This is Mrs. Brennan and her daughter Grace. They'll be staying with us." The two hands, Carlos and Miguel, shared a look. The shorter one tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he said, "welcome to the Frost Ranch." Sarah could only nod, feeling their eyes on her. But they asked no questions, just got right to work unhitching the horses with quiet skill. "I'll show you the house," Daniel said to her. "Carlos, Miguel, see to the horses, then come up for coffee." The house was cold inside, the fireplace dark and empty. Daniel went right to the hearth and started building a fire. Sarah stood by the door holding Grace, not knowing what to do with herself. Without looking up, he nodded to a door. "That's your room. It's the only one in the house. I will be sleeping by the fire, so the room is yours." Sarah stepped to the door. It was a small room, but clean. It had a bed with a quilt, a dresser, a washstand, and a window with a mountain view. And in the corner, she saw a wooden cradle. "Made that last night," Daniel said from behind her. His voice was flat. "I figured the baby needed a safe place to sleep." Sarah turned, stunned. "You made this last night?" "Could not sleep anyway," he said, turning back to the fireplace. "It is not perfect, but it is strong." Sarah gently placed Grace in bed. She ran her hand over the smooth wood. The joints were tight. This was no rough job. This was careful, skilled work. "Thank you," she said softly. Daniel just nodded and left, closing the door. Sarah sank onto the bed, her head in her hands. She was stuck on a stranger's ranch in Colorado. She had no money and no way to leave this man. This man who had bought her, but would not even look at her. Just then, little Grace began to fuss. Sarah scooped her up, holding her close. She breathed in that sweet baby smell. "We are going to be all right. We have to be," she whispered. When she came out, the main room looked different. The fire was blazing. Daniel was making coffee and slicing bread. Two other men, Carlos and Miguel, sat quietly by the fire. They held their hats in their laps and looked unsure. Mrs. Brennan, Daniel said without turning, this is Carlos and Miguel Rivera. They are good men who have worked here for 2 years. Carlos stood up. Ma'am, we are mighty pleased to have you here. Very pleased, Miguel added quickly. It has been all men around here for too long. Sarah was unsure what to say, but Daniel just poured the coffee. He handed her a tin cup. Sit, he said, nodding to the table. We need to discuss the arrangements. Sarah sat down with Grace in her lap. The three men sat around the table. It felt very serious. Daniel sat across from her. Mrs. Brennan has agreed to work for her keep, he announced. His voice was all business. Cooking, cleaning, tending chickens, and whatever the house needs. That is not necessary, boss, Carlos started. We can... Daniel cut him off. It is what she wants. His tone left no room for argument. She will be paid a fair wage, $20 a month, plus room and board. $20. Sarah could not believe it. That is too much, she said. No, it is the standard wage. Daniel replied, Carlos and Miguel earn $30, but they handle livestock. 20 is fair for the house. But I am not a housekeeper. I am... Sarah stopped. What was she? A piece of property? A charity case? You are someone who works for a wage, Daniel said quietly. Same as the rest of us. If that is what you want to be. Sarah finally met his eyes. They were steady and impossible to read. She had nothing to go on. All right, she finally said, $20. Good. Daniel then turned to his men. You two will stay in the bunkhouse. Do not come to the main house unless you are invited. Mrs. Brennan's privacy is to be respected. Y'all will treat her with respect. Understood? Yes, boss, they answered. One more thing. Daniel's voice went cold. If anyone asks, you tell them she's my housekeeper. Her business is her own. Carlos and Miguel just nodded. Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders. He was protecting her. Now get to it, Daniel said. That north pasture fence won't fix itself. The men left, and Daniel turned to the window. I've got to ride out with them, he said, his back to her. I need to check on the herd after that storm. I'll be back by sundown. What should I do? Sarah asked, her voice small. Whatever you want. Rest. There's food in the pantry. And plenty of firewood stacked outside. He finally turned and looked right at her. This is your home now, Sarah. For as long as you want it. You don't need my permission to be here. And with that, he was gone. Sarah sat in the quiet house holding a sleeping Grace. She tried to make sense of it all. Daniel Frost bought her freedom, gave her a bowing, and protected her name. And now he was treating her like a guest, a person who could leave whenever she pleased. She couldn't figure him out. That uncertainty was almost worse than the courthouse. At least back there, she knew exactly what those men wanted from her on them. Daniel seemed to want nothing. Sarah spent the afternoon looking around the house. It was simple but clean and strong. The main room had a fireplace, a table, and a handmade rocking chair. The kitchen corner had a cast iron stove, a water pump, and shelves full of supplies. The pantry was stocked for a long winter. More than enough for them all. Then, in the bedroom, she found a surprise. A chest of drawers held Daniel's clothes, but he'd cleared out 2 of them, leaving them empty for her. She had nothing to put in them yet, but curiosity made her open the 3rd drawer. What she saw inside made her breath catch. Tiny baby clothes, folded with care, smelling of cedar. Sarah picked up a small gown. The cotton was soft as a whisper. The stitches were tiny and perfect. These were made with love, for a baby that was loved. Martha's baby, Daniel's stepmother. These must have been her children's things, saved all these years. Sarah gently folded the little gown. She put it back and closed the drawer. She couldn't use them. They felt too sacred, full of another family's story. Grace woke up hungry. Sarah nursed her by the fire, rocking in that handmade chair. The house was warm and filled with afternoon light. A peaceful quiet settled over her. She could hear the cattle lowing outside. This could be a life, she whispered to herself. A real life. But she was afraid to trust it, afraid it wouldn't last. The winter evening came on fast in the mountains. The sun dropped behind the peaks, and long, cold shadows stretched across the valley. Sarah had a simple supper of beans and cornbread, warming on the stove. Daniel finally came in, bringing a blast of cold air with him, his face red from the wind. He saw the table set for two and stopped. "You didn't have to go to that trouble," he said. "It's part of the job," Sarah replied simply. Daniel hung his coat and hat by the door. As he washed his hands, he told her, "Carlos and Miguel, they eat out in the bunkhouse." "I made plenty," Sarah said. "I can take a plate out to them. They'd like that, but you don't have to wait on him." "I'm just earning my keep," she answered. A flicker of respect crossed his face before he sat down at the table. They ate without a word. The quiet was new to Sarah, but not entirely unwelcome. Daniel seemed right at home in the silence, and little Grace was sleeping soundly. Finally, Sarah broke the stillness. "How is the herd?" she asked. "Lost 2 calves in a snowdrift." Daniel's voice was flat. "It could have been worse." "The rest are all right." "I'm so sorry," she said. He just shrugged. "That's ranching for you." Sarah couldn't help but think about the money they represented, the money he'd spent on her. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Are you going to regret it? Buying me?" He set his fork down, his eyes meeting hers for the very first time that night. "No," he said, his voice steady and firm. "I won't ever regret it." "How can you be so sure?" she pressed. "Because I know exactly why I did it." "It was a choice," she shot back. "A choice that cost you $150 and 2 calves. Calves you might have saved if you weren't riding to Caribou Creek." "Maybe," he replied calmly. "Or maybe I'd have lost 4. There's just no way of telling. But I do know one thing. If I hadn't been at that courthouse, you and Grace would be somewhere awful tonight. So no, I don't regret it." She looked down at her plate. "I just don't understand you." "You don't have to," was all he said. Then he stood up. "Going to check the stock one last time. Be sure to lock the door." And just like that, he was gone. Sarah sat alone. The only sound was Grace's soft breathing. She tried to make sense of Daniel Frost. He had spent a fortune just to save her. He gave her a good home and a job, but now he slept out in the barn and avoided her eyes. He treated her like a business deal, not a woman he had rescued from a terrible fate. Sarah cleared the dishes and banked the fire for the night. She locked the big wooden door. Then she went to the bedroom with Grace, her eyes falling on that beautiful, heartbreaking cradle. Sarah laid Grace down, watching her little girl sleep for a good long while. She changed into the nightgown Mrs. Henderson had given her and slipped into the soft, warm bed. Grace was safe and sleeping soundly. This was so much better than the boarding house. It was better than anything she could have hoped for. So why did she feel so on edge? Because this much kindness, with no explanation, felt like a well-laid trap. It all just seemed too good to be true. Daniel Frost was a mystery she couldn't solve. And Sarah had learned the hard way that unpredictable men were dangerous. Outside, the wind howled and rattled the windows, but she tried to find some sleep. She knew Daniel was out in that coal barn all alone. For 3 days, things stayed the same. Daniel would leave at dawn with Carlos and Miguel. Sarah kept the house and tended to the chores. He would come back at dusk, eat his supper in silence, and then head right back out. They only spoke when they absolutely had to. The one bright spot was baby Grace. The little one was thriving in the warm, peaceful house, smiling more and fussing less. Sarah even found herself humming old tunes from her childhood as she worked around the house. On the 4th morning, Sarah woke up to a world covered in fresh snow. It wasn't a blizzard, just a heavy, quiet snowfall that made everything white and still. She made coffee and breakfast, expecting Daniel any minute. But he never came. After a couple of hours, a knot of worry tightened in her stomach. She bundled up Grace, pulled on Daniel's big coat, and stepped out into the biting cold. The snow muffled every sound as she made her way toward the barn. Inside, it was warmer, filled with the heat from the horses and 2 milk cows. She heard Carlos and Miguel speaking Spanish in the back and followed their voices. She found Daniel in a horse stall, his shirt soaked with sweat and his face pale as a ghost. He was leaning heavily on the horse, with one hand pressed tight against his side. "Daniel." He looked up, his face a mix of surprise and maybe shame. "I told you to stay in the house," he said, his voice strained. "I was worried," Sarah shot back. "What's wrong?" He winced. "It's nothing. Just pulled something yesterday." "That's not nothing. You can barely stand up," she said, turning to the other men. "Carlos!" The two ranch hands came running, their faces full of concern. How long has he been like this? Sarah asked. Carlos looked down. Since yesterday afternoon, ma'am. That was it. She turned to Daniel. You're coming to the house right now, and I won't hear another word about it. You're hurt, and you need to rest. Carlos, give me a hand. Daniel tried to argue, but Carlos was already at his side. Miguel rushed ahead to get the barn door. Together, they practically carried Daniel through the snow. Inside, Sarah pointed to the rocking chair by the fire. Sit down. He sat, his jaw clenched tight with pain. Sarah handed baby Grace to a nervous Miguel, who held her like she was made of glass. She turned back to Daniel. Take off your shirt, she ordered. You can do it, or I can cut it off. Your choice. His eyes flashed with anger, but he slowly unbuttoned his shirt. When he pulled the fabric away, Chuck gasped. His whole side was a terrible mess of black and purple. The bruise stretched from his ribs clear down to his hip. What on earth happened? She demanded. Got kicked by a calf, Daniel said through gritted teeth. It is just a bruise. Just a bruise? Sarah knelt beside him. You could have broken ribs. What were you thinking? The work has to get done, he said. Not when you can barely stand, she shot back. She looked at the other men. Get me a basin of clean snow and some rags now. The men scrambled to help. Daniel's face was pale, with sweat on his brow despite the cold. This is just plain foolish, she said softly. You are being so stubborn. I have been hurt worse, he mumbled. That does not make this any smarter, she replied. Her hands hovered over the injury. You need a doctor. That is a day's ride from here. He finally met her gaze, his guard completely down. You are already doing what needs to be done. He used cold dew rags to keep the swelling down. Just watch me close. He paused. And you tell me if I am being a fool. She said, you are being a fool. A small smile touched his lips. Noted, he whispered. Carlos returned and Sarah gently placed a cold cloth on his side. Daniel flinched but held still. Miguel brought Grace back and Sarah put her in the cradle nearby. Y'all go on and finish the chores, she told the men. I will stay here with him. Ma'am, if you need us, Carlos began. I know, she said. I will fire a shot. Thank you both, she added, for telling me the truth and for helping him. The men left, and the cabin grew quiet. It was just Sarah, Daniel, and the baby. She tended the fire and changed the cold rags on his side. She made coffee, which he drank quietly. For once, he did not try to get up. He just sat with his eyes closed, breathing slow and easy. After a long silence, she asked, Why did you not tell me? He sighed, I did not want to worry you. It is my job to worry, she said gently. Part of that job is keeping you from working yourself into an early grave. His eyes opened. Are you just my housekeeper, Sarah? Her hands froze. What else would I be? She whispered. I wish I knew, he answered softly. You are the one who set the terms. $20 a month for my work. Daniel winced, shifting in his seat. I know, but it feels wrong. You are not staff. Then what am I? He held her gaze. You are my responsibility. Sarah looked confused. What does that mean? He spoke carefully. It means I bought you. That makes you my responsibility. I promised you safety, and I will keep my word. But I do not know how to act. Everything I do feels wrong. Wrong how? If I am friendly, it seems I want something. If I am distant, I am treating you like property. I just cannot seem to win with you, Sarah. So I have just been working hard, trying my best to give you space. She stared at him. You could have just asked what I needed. Could I have? His voice became hard. Every time we talk, you look at me like I am about to hurt you. Like I am just one more man who will fail you. His words hit her like a slap. She stood up so fast the cloth fell. That is not fair. Maybe not, but it is true. You do not know anything about what I have been through. You are right, I do not. He leaned his head back, looking bone-tired. And you do not know a thing about me either. We are two strangers trying to live under the same roof. It is not easy. As little Grace began to fuss, Sarah wrapped her arms around her so. She picked up her daughter, holding her like a small shield. I am trying, she whispered. I am trying to trust you, but I do not have much trust left to give. I know, he said gently. and I am not asking for it. Not yet. I am just asking you to stop waiting for me to be a monster. Because I am not going to be one, Sarah. She looked at him then, repeatedly looked at him. She saw the pain in his face, the dark bruising on his side, and his complete exhaustion. She saw the man who rode through a blizzard for her, the man who built a cradle in the night. All right, she said, her voice finally steady. I will try. After that, a quiet truce settled in the small cabin. She continued to tend to his wounds. He drank the willow bark tea she made for him. Outside, the snow just kept on falling. By evening, the swelling had gone down, and his color looked better. He insisted on sitting at the table, though it clearly pained him. You sleep in the bed tonight, Sarah said. I will just take the rocking chair. No, Daniel, the bed is yours. You are hurt and need a proper rest. I will not have you sleeping in a cold barn. I will sleep by the fire then. Sarah just looked at him. Why are you so stubborn? Because a lady needs her privacy. I will not take your room from you. What I need, Sarah said, is for you to stop acting like I am made of glass. I have been through worse. I can handle you sleeping by the fire. Daniel looked at her a long moment. All right, but you tell me if you feel uneasy. No arguments. Deal, she said. That night, Sarah made Daniel a pallet by the fire. She brought him extra blankets and stacked wood nearby. Grace was already asleep in her cradle, but Sarah found she did not want to leave the main room. Daniel's quiet voice broke the silence. Thank you for everything today, Sarah. You are paying me to keep this house, she said. That includes keeping you in one piece. Even so, thank you, he repeated. She nodded and went to her room but left the door cracked open. She wanted to hear his breathing in the dark, a steady and reassuring sound. She lay awake for a good while, listening to the fire and thinking about trust. Later that night, Grace started crying. Sarah got up to soothe the baby. When she came out, Daniel was trying to sit up, his face etched with worry. It is just the baby, Sarah whispered. Go on back to sleep. But he was already up, adding a log to the fire. I am awake now. Bring her out here where it is warmer. So Sarah sat in the rocker with Grace while Daniel tended the fire. They sat in silence for a good hour. It was not comfort, not really, but it was a start, a small crack in the wall between them. When Grace fell back asleep, Sarah went back to her own bed, and for the first time she realized she was not afraid of him anymore. Maybe that was enough. Daniel healed up slow over the next week. The deep bruises on his ribs began to fade. Sarah kept a close eye on him, watching for the flicker of pain he tried to hide. Her gut told her that he would push himself too hard if she was not watching him. You are hovering, Daniel said one morning when she refilled his coffee cup again. I am just making sure you do not fall and crack your head open, she shot back. Carlos just laughed from the table. He and Miguel had started taking breakfast in the main house. It had just sort of happened after Daniel got hurt, and Sarah was glad for the company. The house felt less empty, less like they were walking on eggshells around each other. She is worse than my own mama, Miguel joked to Daniel. You ought to just listen to her. Your mother was a smart woman, Sarah said. She knew stubborn men need managing. Yes, ma'am, Miguel grinned. She always said that. The easy talk felt good to Sarah. She had forgotten what normal felt like, just folks sharing a meal. Grace must have sensed it, too. She started making happy noises from her cradle. Sounds like someone's awake, Carlos said, peeking into the bedroom. Can I hold her, ma'am? Sarah hesitated, wanting to keep Grace close. But Carlos's face was so kind. She trusted Daniel's judgment in his men. Just support her head, Sarah told him, and sit down first. Carlos settled in the rocker with Grace, his big hands surprisingly gentle. Miguel made faces until the baby smiled. She's a beautiful little thing, Carlos said, just like her mama. Sarah blushed and turned to the dishes. She glanced back to find Daniel watching her. Then the moment was broken. A sharp knock came at the door. Everyone froze. Visitors were rare out here. Daniel stood slowly, his hand drifting toward the rifle on the wall. Carlos, take the baby to the bedroom, Daniel said low. Sarah, you go too. Something in his voice made her obey. She took Grace and hurried into the bedroom. Carlos followed, standing in the doorway to shield her from the main room. Miguel peeked out the window. It's a wagon, he said. 2 horses, 1 driver. Recognize him? Daniel asked. No, boss, but he's alone. Daniel relaxed a little. All right, and I'll go talk to him. He opened the door and cold air rushed inside. A man's voice came through. "Mr. Frost? Name's William Chen. I'm looking for Sarah Brennan." Sarah's breath caught. It was the husband of the kind woman from the courthouse. She pushed past Carlos. "Mr. Chen, is your wife all right?" The man on the porch looked weathered but had kind eyes. He smiled when he saw her. "She's fine, Mrs. Brennan. Just worried sick about you. She sent me to check." His eyes shifted to Daniel. "You must be Mr. Frost." Daniel's voice was cautious. "You came 20 miles? My wife hasn't slept a wink. She feels responsible for what happened at the auction." Mr. Chen stamped his cold feet. "She made me promise to see you were okay with my own eyes." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. Mrs. Chen, who had so little herself. She sent her husband through the snow just out of kindness. "Please come inside," Sarah said, "Please come in and have some coffee, Mr. Chen stepped inside, taking his hat off. His eyes took in the cozy home. He saw the breakfast dishes and the two men, Carlos and Miguel, standing like guards. He looked at Sarah for a long moment. "Well, you're looking a sight better than you did at the courthouse," he finally said, his voice softening. "I am better," Sarah told him. "Mr. Frost said I could speak with you alone." Mr. Chen looked over at Daniel. "No offense, sir, but my wife needs to know the truth of things." Daniel just nodded. "Sarah, would you feel better talking to Mr. Chen in private?" The fact that he gave her a choice right then and there made her answer simple. "No, there are no secrets here. Mr. Frost saved me from a terrible fate. He gave me a good job with fair wages. And he treats me with respect. You can tell your wife not to worry." "Are you certain?" Mr. Chen asked. "Because if you need help, a way out." "I do not," Sarah said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "This is where I want to bide, at least for now." Mr. Chen studied her face, then gave a slow nod. "All right then, I believe you." He turned to Daniel. "Sir, my wife sent something for you. She called it a payment, though she knows you don't need it." He pulled a small cloth bundle from his coat. When he unwrapped it, Sarah saw a loaf of bread, still warm, and a jar of preserved peaches. "She said any man who'd do what you did deserves a proper thank you," Mr. Chen explained. "And she wanted Mrs. Brennan to know she has friends in Caribou Creek. Our door is always open to you." Sarah took the bundle with trembling hands. "Please tell her thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll never forget this." Mr. Chen smiled kindly. "I will. She'll be mighty glad to hear you're safe." He put his hat back on. "I should get going. It is a long ride." "Stay for breakfast," Sarah insisted. "And please take some supplies for your wife." Daniel didn't hesitate, loading Mr. Chen's wagon with flour, salt, pork, and beans. He waved off Sarah's worries about the python. As Mr. Chen rode away, Sarah watched him from the porch. She watched until the wagon was gone. "That was a good thing you did," she said quietly to Daniel. "Mrs. Chen stood up for you when no one else would. It is only right she eats well this winter." Sarah turned to him. "You are a peculiar man, Daniel Frost." "So you keep saying." "I mean it as a compliment." "I know you do." And he smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Come on," he said. "We've got work to do." After that day, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Daniel's ribs healed, and he started doing light chores, though Sarah would still catch him wincing every now and then. Carlos and Miguel became regulars at the breakfast table, and slowly, without even trying, the four of them started to feel like a family. Little Grace was thriving. At 4 months old, she was growing bigger and stronger, her eyes now focusing on their faces with recognition. She would break into a big smile at Carlos's silly faces and kick her little legs whenever Miguel sang his Spanish lullabies. Whenever Daniel held little Grace, she'd wrap her tiny hand around his finger with surprising strength. "She surely likes you," Sarah said one evening, watching him. Daniel just rocked the fussing baby. "She's a good girl, easy to like." "That is not what I meant," Sarah said softly. Daniel looked at her and knew. She felt a blush creep up her neck and looked away. These quiet moments were becoming more common. Something important and unspoken was always hanging in the air between them. A part of her wanted to just say it, but another part was terrified that words would break the spell. The choice was taken from her hands 3 days later when riders appeared on the horizon. Miguel saw them first. He was carrying firewood when he stopped dead in his tracks. "Boss," he called out, his voice tight. "We've got company." Daniel and Carlos came out of the barn. Sarah stood in the doorway, holding Grace close. They all watched three horsemen ride down the snowy hill. "You expecting visitors?" Carlos asked. "No." Daniel's voice turned hard as stone. "Sarah, get in the house, lock the door." "Who are they?" she asked. "Don't know, but men riding like that usually mean trouble." He pleaded with his eyes. "Please, just do as I ask." The tension in his voice convinced her. She hurried inside, locked the door, and peered out the window, trying to stay hidden. The riders entered the yard. They were rough men with hard faces and guns on their whips. Their leader was a big fellow with a graying beard, and he walked like he owned the place. Way. "Well now," the man said, his voice sharp in the cold. "Daniel Frost. It has been a long time." "Not nearly long enough, Garrett," Daniel replied, his voice pure ice. "State your business." "I heard you had some excitement in town. Bought a woman at an auction." Garrett's eyes scanned the property. "My business is my own," Daniel said. "See, that's where you are wrong," Garrett smiled, showing rotten teeth. "It becomes my business when that property used to belong to Harold Brennan." Sarah felt her blood run cold. He said it like she was a chair. "Mrs. Brennan is under my protection," Daniel said, standing his ground. "Now you need to leave." "Protection?" Garrett let out a nasty laugh. "Is that what they are calling it these days?" His men chuckled along. Carlos and Miguel moved to flank Daniel, their hands hovering over their guns. "I cannot do that." Garrett's smile faded. "Harold Brennan owed me a great deal of money from gambling. And when a man dies with debts, his property pays for them. Everything he owned. That means his daughter-in-law belongs to me now." Daniel cut him off. "That is not how the law works, Garrett." "This here's from Judge Morrison," Garrett said, "and he happens to owe me a favor. It's a writ signed by the judge himself, says I have legal claim on the Brennan estate. That includes Sarah and her baby." Sarah felt her knees go weak. This could not be happening again. "Let me see that," Daniel demanded. Garrett handed it over, and as Daniel read, his face turned to stone. He looked up, pure fire in his eyes. "This is a sham, a complete fraud. A judge can't just do this after a sale is final." Garrett smirked. "Oh, can he? I see you paid for the woman. Well, I paid for Brennan's debts. The judge says my claim is older. So you either hand her over or you pay the debt." "How much?" Daniel asked. $300. The number hung in the air like a hangman's noose. $300 was twice what Daniel had paid. It was more than most men made in a whole year. "I don't have that kind of money," Daniel said quietly. "Then I reckon we'll take the woman." Garrett nodded toward the house. "Unless a pretty thing like her wants to settle the debt in other ways." Before he could finish, Daniel's fist connected with his jaw. They both went down in the snow. Daniel's injured ribs were forgotten in his fury. Carlos and Miguel rushed forward to help, but Garrett's men had their guns drawn. "Stay back," one of them warned. "This is between them." Sarah watched in horror. Daniel was faster, but Garrett was a bigger man who fought dirty. He landed a heavy blow to Daniel's injured side, making Daniel gasp and stumble. Garrett used the chance to pin Daniel against the barn, a meaty hand around his throat. "Now you listen," he snarled. "I don't care about your noble act. She is property, plain and simple, and I have the legal paper to prove it. Give her up easy or I will take her by force." Daniel's hands searched the snow and closed around a broken fence board. He swung it with all his might. It cracked against Garrett's temple. The big man staggered back, blood streaming from the cut. "She's not property," Daniel gasped, clutching his side. "She's a human being. You will not touch her." Garrett wiped the blood from his face. "You just assaulted me, Frost. That's a crime. I can have you arrested." "Then do it," Daniel said, standing tall despite the pain. "And I'll tell the judge exactly what you tried here. We'll just see whose story he believes." For a long moment, they just stared. Then an ugly smile spread on Garrett's face. "This ain't over. That paper is legal. I'll be back, and I'll bring the sheriff with me. You'll hand her over, or you'll go to jail for kidnapping." He and his men mounted their horses. "You have 3 days to get the money, Frost. After that, she's mine." Then they rode away. Daniel stood alone in the trampled snow, his knuckles bloody and his eyes burning with fury. Sarah ran to him. Are you all right? I'm fine, he said, but he was shaking. We need to talk inside. Inside, Carlos poured a drink while Sarah tended to Daniel's bleeding face. But his ribs were the real problem. He was hiding the pain with every breath. You need to lie down, she said. He grabbed her hand. No time. We need a plan. Listen, Daniel began. Garrett's paperwork might be crooked, but it's legal enough to cause trouble. And Judge Morrison is bought and paid for. If the sheriff returns, we are in for a fight. Daniel turned to his men. How much money do we have? About $70, Carlos said. Plus 80 from the last cattle sale, but that's for spring supplies. So 150 total, Daniel figured. That is only half of what we need. Sarah spoke up. I have $20, my wages. Please take it. No, Daniel said firmly. This is my problem. It is my problem too, she insisted. He paced, favoring his bruised side. I bought you at that auction. You are my responsibility. I am not your responsibility, Sarah shot back. Stop acting like you own me. Just because you paid for me. He faced her. That is not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Because you are making choices about my life, just like every other man I have ever known. Her words hit him hard. You are right. I am sorry. What do you want to do? Sarah glanced down at her sleeping daughter, Grace, so innocent of the danger. She looked back at Daniel. I want to fight, she said, her voice quiet but firm. No more being sold. No more men deciding my fate. Her voice grew with resolve. But Grace has to be safe, if that means giving Garrett what he wants. No, Daniel crossed the room in a few quick strides, stopping right in front of her. You are not giving him a thing. We will figure this out. Well, how? We do not have the money. Then I will get it. I will sell cattle, or... He paused as an idea began to form. There might be another way. He turned to his men. Y'all still know folks in Denver? Folks who might buy horses? Miguel hesitated. Boss, it is the middle of winter. No one is buying. They will for our horses if the price is right, Daniel said, his mind racing ahead. If we sell 6 horses at $20 each, that is only $120, Carlos calculated. Add our 150 and we have 270. Still not enough, Sarah said softly. You need those horses for the ranch. Daniel's gaze was steady. I need you and Grace safe more. We will make it work. Then Sarah spoke. There is another option. Everyone turned to her. I could go with Garrett. I could work off the debt for him. Absolutely not. Daniel's voice was sharp as a whip. Do you understand me, Sarah? Do you have any idea what Garrett meant by other ways? Sarah clutched Grace tighter. I understand completely, Daniel. I understood it when they bid on me like I was cattle. I have understood it my whole life. A woman always understands. The room went quiet. The brothers just stared at the floorboards. Daniel's face was pale. Then you know I cannot let that happen. Sarah looked him square in the eye. You cannot lose this ranch for me. You are worth it, he said, his voice rough. You and Grace are worth more. That is not your call, she shot back. Yes, it is. I promised you safety. He turned to his men. Ride to Denver at dawn. Find buyers for the horses. I need the cash by a week's end. Take any price. Oh, boss, Carlos began. Just do it, Daniel said. The brothers nodded. We will go at first light. Later that night, Sarah could not sleep. She heard Daniel pacing. The little house felt like it was closing in on them. She finally got up and peeked through the door. Daniel was at the table, head in his hands. You should be asleep, she said softly. So should you, he replied. She stepped in. You cannot sell your horses, Daniel. This ranch is your life, she insisted. It is how you work. I will not watch Garrett take you, Daniel said, standing up. I am doing this for me. I could not live with myself otherwise. Why t'takum? Sarah asked. Why do you care? You barely know me. We are strangers living under the same roof, that is all. He walked right up to her, his face tired and full of worry. I know you sing old songs to Grace when you think I cannot hear. I know the hard wind keeps you awake at night. I know you check the locks 3 times before you go to bed. And I saw you let Carlos hold your baby, just to be kind. Sarah's breath caught. You are braver than anyone I have ever met. If he takes you, something good in this world is gone. We are not strangers. Not anymore. Daniel, her voice cracked. He stepped back fast. I am sorry. I should not have said that. Sarah grabbed his hand. Do not apologize. Just tell me what you want from this. I cannot keep guessing and getting it wrong. He looked at their joined hands. I want you to stay. I want Grace to grow up here, safe and loved. I want to build something with you. Not because of a debt, but because we both choose it. He met her eyes. But only if that is what you want too. I do not know what I want, Sarah admitted. With Garrett showing up, I just cannot think straight. Then do not think, he said. Just feel. What do you feel on this ranch? Sarah closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt safe. She felt warm and like she could finally breathe again. I feel like I could stay, she whispered. If you truly mean it, I mean it. Daniel's hand tightened around hers. I have never meant anything more. They stood there in the firelight, with something new between them. Outside, the winter storm raged against the windows, but inside the house was warm. And for the first time since Thomas died, Sarah allowed herself to feel hope. Maybe her future was something she could choose, not just something to survive, even if Garrett returned in 3 days, even if their world fell apart tomorrow. Tonight, holding Daniel's hand, Sarah chose hope, and she was learning that was its own kind of bravery. Carlos and Miguel left before sunrise, their saddlebags packed for the long ride. Sarah watched from the window as they led 6 horses, including Daniel's favorite, Buck, into the darkness. Daniel stood in the yard until they disappeared, his shoulders rigid with tension. When he came inside, his face was a blank slate. They will get a good price, Sarah said, trying to help. Maybe. Daniel moved to the stove and poured coffee, his hands steady. We will know in 2 days. But Garrett had only given them 3. That was cutting it way too close. Sarah fed Grace and tried to stay busy with simple chores, sweeping and washing. But the house felt wrong without the easy sound of Carlos and Miguel's voices. Everything felt like it was holding its breath. Daniel spent the day on chores that did not need doing. He repaired fences that were not broken. He chopped enough firewood to last 2 winters. Sarah knew exactly what he was doing. She had done the same thing after Thomas died. Keeping busy was easier than thinking. By evening, they were both worn out, but neither of them wanted to sleep. They sat at the table with a cold supper they had no appetite for. The silence was thick. Tell me about Thomas, Daniel finally said. Sarah looked up, surprised. Why could? Because you loved him. Because he is Grace's father. And because I want to know. Plate, if that's all right. Sarah put down her fork. Nobody had even mentioned Thomas since he passed. Not the bank, not the judge, not a single soul. It was like her husband was just erased. He was a kind man, she said, her voice soft, quiet. He loved his books and numbers. Said they made sense when people didn't. We met at my father's store. He came in for a ledger, and we just talked for 2 whole hours about nothing at all. She gave a small smile. He asked me to marry him 3 months later. Were you happy? I surely thought I was. We had a good, simple life. Thomas worked hard. I kept the house. We always talked about having children one day. Her hand drifted over to Grace's cradle where the baby was sleeping soundly. But when I got pregnant, everything changed. How so? Thomas was just plain terrified, worried about money, about responsibility. His own mother passed away in childbirth, you see. I reckon he never truly got over that fear. When Grace was born, he held her for maybe 5 minutes. Just 5. Then he handed her back to me, said he had to check the books. He was scared, Daniel said, his voice low. I know, but I was scared too. And I didn't have this choice to just walk away. Sarah looked right at Daniel. He died 3 weeks later. He never even got to know his own daughter. I don't know if he ever would have learned how to love her like she deserves. I'm so sorry, don't be. Thomas was a good man, but he wasn't a strong one. When his father got into trouble, Thomas just looked the other way. When the debts got high, he pretended they weren't there. He was good at ignoring what scared him. She took a breath. You're not like that. How can you know? Because you rode through a blizzard for me. Because you're selling your own horses to help. Because you don't run when things get hard. Sarah's eyes locked with his. You're nothing like Thomas, Daniel. Not one bit. A different look came over Daniel's face. He started to say something, but the sound of a fast-approaching horse cut him off. They both shot to their feet. Daniel grabbed the rifle from the wall. Sarah's heart started to pound in her chest. It was too early for Carlos and Miguel. It's not Garrett, Daniel said. Just one rider, coming in hard. He pulled the door open. A second later, Mr. Chen stumbled inside, his face pale from the cold. Thank heavens, he gasped out. I rode all night. I had to warn you. Warn us about what? Daniel helped the older man into a chair. Sarah was already pouring him some hot coffee. It's Garrett. Mr. Chen took the cup, his hands trembling. He showed up in Caribou Creek yesterday, started asking questions about you, Mrs. Brennan, and about the auction. What kind of questions? Sarah asked, her voice tight. He was looking for witnesses, trying to find anyone who saw what happened. He's trying to build a case, trying to say the sale wasn't on the level. Mr. Chen looked at Daniel. He's also been talking to Dutch Hansen and Frank Cooper, offering them money to lie for him. He wants them to swear that you threatened them into dropping out of the bidding. That is a bald-faced lie, Sarah said. I know it. You know it. But Mr. Chen shook his head sadly. Judge Morrison, he'll believe whatever Garrett's money tells him to believe. Daniel's jaw set like stone. How much time do we have? Garrett is getting his men today. He's bringing them and the sheriff here tomorrow. He'll claim I took you by force. He'll say the auction was a sham and you belong to him. Mr. Chen looked at Sarah. I am truly sorry. My wife sent me the second we heard. Thank you, Sarah said softly, for making the ride. There is more, Mr. Chen said. Garrett's been asking about you, Mr. Frost. He knows about Martha. Daniel froze. What about Martha? He plans to use it to say you have a history with vulnerable women. He's going to paint you as a man with no honor, that you can't be trusted around me. The air in the room went still. Pure fury rose in Sarah's chest. So that's his game, she said. Ruin your good name and take me all at once. It's a clever plan, Daniel said, his voice low. If the judge sides with him, my hands are tied. If I tried to stop him then, I would be the one breaking the law. Then we won't fight him with the law, Sarah said, her voice full of sudden steel. Both men stared at her. What are you talking about? Daniel asked. His whole argument is that I am property, that I can be passed along like a piece of furniture. Sarah's hands balled into fists. But what if I am no longer Harold Brennan's property? What if, by law, I belong to someone else? The words tumbled out of her. Marry me, Daniel, tonight. If I am your wife, he has no claim. I am not Harold's widow. I would be Sarah Frost. Daniel just stared, speechless. You can't be serious. I have never been more serious. It is the only way to stop him. Sarah, marriage is not a legal trick. It is a contract, Sarah cut in. You said you wanted to build a life with me. Well, let us start building it now. This is not how it should be. Daniel's voice was rough. You deserve better than this. What I deserve, she said, stepping closer, is the right to choose my own life. This is my choice. I am choosing you, Daniel. I am choosing this ranch and our future. Not because I have to, but because I want to. You are scared. He is threatening you. Do not tell me how I feel, Sarah snapped. I have had enough men telling me what I want. I am telling you right here, with a witness, that I want to be your wife. The only question is, Daniel, do you want to be my husband? Daniel looked at her, a battle raging in his eyes. You know I do, he said at last. More than anything. But not like this. Not because you feel like you're in a trap. I do not feel trapped. I feel... Sarah held his hand tight. This is my choice, Daniel. The first real one since Thomas died. Mr. Chen nodded. She is right. A legal marriage would make Garrett's claim much harder. He would have to prove the marriage was a sham, which would cost him plenty. See? Sarah squeezed his hand. It is the smart play. It is plumb crazy, Daniel replied. You want to get married right now, in the middle of a winter's night? Yes, she said. Are you certain? Daniel asked. I have never been more certain of anything. Daniel looked down at their hands, then back up at her, his mind made up. All right, he said. Let's get ourselves married. Mr. Chen stood up. I can be a witness, but you will need someone to perform the ceremony. The closest preacher is in Caribou Creek, and Garrett's men are watching the town. Then we bring the preacher here, Sarah declared, turning to Mr. Chen. Would Reverend Douglas come out this late in this kind of weather? To help you and to stop Garrett? Yes, ma'am, I believe he would. Then please go, Sarah urged Mr. Chen nodded, promising to be back in 3 or 4 hours. He looked at Daniel. You keep her safe. I will, Daniel promised. After he left, the house was quiet. Sarah realized she was still holding Daniel's hand and let go. I should check on Grace, she said. But Daniel gently caught her arm. Sarah, are you really sure? Once this is done, there is no turning back. You will be tied to me in this ranch for good. I know, she said, facing him. I am scared to death, but I am not having second thoughts. I do not doubt this, and I do not doubt you. You should, Daniel said quietly. I am a poor rancher with a past I am not proud of. I lost my first family, Martha and her children. I cannot fail you too. What if you do not, she whispered, touching his face. What if we build something good? He leaned into her hand. I want that so much it scares me. Then we can be scared together, she said. They stood there in the quiet of the night. Then Daniel opened his eyes and gave her a true, heartfelt smile. All right, he said again. Let's do this the right way, as much as we can. He returned from the bedroom with a small box, holding a simple, worn gold ring. It was Martha's, he explained. She made me promise to give it to someone who deserved it. He held it up in the firelight. And I reckon that someone is you, Sarah. Sarah's throat went tight. Daniel, I can't accept this. It was your stepmama's ring. His voice broke. She'd want me to have the one thing she never did, a real family. With trembling hands, Sarah took the heavy, solid ring. I'll take good care of it, she promised. The next 2 hours felt unreal. Sarah cleaned the already tidy house just to keep her hands busy. Daniel built the fire up high. Soon, baby Grace started to stir. Sarah nursed her, and Daniel made coffee. They barely spoke a word. After all, they were about to be married. It was a heavy but right feeling. It felt like destiny. She could not help but think of Thomas. He would not approve, but he was gone. Grace needed a father, and she needed help. And Daniel, he needed someone too. Maybe he was lonely or just needed help with this big ranch. Whatever it was, she hoped she could be that for him. Just then, horses arrived. Daniel grabbed his rifle, but it was just Mr. Chen with an older gentleman. Reverend Douglas? The man said, stamping snow off. Mr. Chen says you need a wedding. Yes, sir, we do, Daniel replied, knowing how strange it all must seem. Son, in 40 years I have seen stranger things. The Reverend looked from Daniel to Sarah. All that matters is if you are both here by your own free will. We are, Sarah said with a firm voice. Daniel nodded. Yes, sir, both of us. The Reverend nodded. All right then, Mr. Chen, you will be our witness. They stood before the warm fireplace, Sarah holding Grace tight. Daniel stood right beside her. The Reverend opened his worn Bible. Marriage is a sacred promise, he began, not to be taken lightly. The words washed over Sarah, feeling different than the first time she had heard them. With Daniel, they felt more real, somehow more true. Daniel Frost, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold for better or worse, till death do you part. Daniel's voice was steady when he said, I do. Sarah Brennan, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, for better or worse? She looked at Daniel, the man who had saved her life, and took a deep breath. This stranger was about to be her husband. I do, she said with a clear voice. Daniel gently slid his mother's ring onto her finger. It fit her perfectly. The gold felt warm against her skin as the Reverend spoke the final words. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Daniel paused for a moment. This would be their very first kiss. She lifted her face to his, and the kiss was gentle, more a promise than a passion. When he pulled away, his eyes were full of wonder. Hello, wife, he whispered. Hello, husband, she answered softly. Mr. Chen clapped them both on the back. Congratulations. Now let's get these papers signed and make it official. They signed by the firelight, his signature bold, hers a little shaky but clear. Mr. Chen and Reverend Douglas signed their names as witnesses to the union. The Reverend folded the paper carefully. Keep this safe, son, he told Daniel. Daniel thanked them both. Just doing the Lord's work, the Reverend said with a smile. As he bundled up to leave, he added, I reckon you two will be good together. I have seen enough marriages to know when one has a real chance. This one does. After they left, Sarah and Daniel stood alone in the house that was now theirs. I can sleep out in the barn, Daniel offered, to give you your privacy. No, her voice was firm. We are properly married. You will stay by the fire. She touched the new ring on her finger. Please stay. Daniel nodded his head. All right, I will stay. They got ready for bed in a comfortable, quiet understanding. Daniel built up the fire as Sarah took Grace into the bedroom for the night. When she came out for water, he respectfully looked away. Daniel, she said quietly. He met her eyes. I should be the one thanking you. You saved my life too. How do you figure that? She asked. Because this was just a ranch. Now, it is a home. He smiled. Good night, Sarah Frost. Her new name felt strange, but also very right. Good night, Daniel. In her room, she could hear him settling down by the fire. Her husband. She was married again to a man she barely knew, out of desperation. But somehow this felt more real, more true than her first marriage ever had. Sarah touched the ring on her finger and finally let herself hope for a real future. She pictured a happy life here, a real family, Daniel working the land and little Grace learning to ride. Of course, Garrett could still come and destroy it all tomorrow. But for tonight, in this quiet moment, Sarah let herself believe. She had chosen Daniel, and she had chosen to fight for this life. Outside, the winter storm finally passed, and the stars came out. In the small ranch house, two near strangers slept as husband and wife. They were ready to face whatever the morning would bring, together. Dawn arrived too quickly, with the smell of coffee already brewing. Sarah saw the wedding ring on her finger, and reality came crashing back. She was married to Daniel Frost, and Garrett was coming today. Daniel was at the stove, his hair still damp from washing. He looked up as she entered, maybe surprised to see his wife in the daylight. Coffee's ready, he said quietly. I made some porridge. Sarah took the cup, their fingers brushing for just a second. Everything felt different now, charged with a new kind of meaning. Daniel said Carlos and Miguel should be back from Denver by noon. He moved to the window watching the empty yard. We need to be ready. Daniel loaded his rifle while Sarah packed a bag, just in case. They packed food and Grace's things, the silence heavy as a storm brewing. Finally, they heard horses. It was Carlos and Miguel, looking bone-tired. They were leading two horses, not the six they had left with. Well, Daniel asked as the men swung down from their saddles. Carlos pulled out a leather pouch. $240. Daniel counted it. With their savings, it came to $390. It was $90 more than they needed. Y'all did good, Daniel said. He looked over at Sarah, a small smile on his face. It's more than enough. A huge weight lifted from Sarah's chest. They had done it. But then Carlos spoke up. There's more. We heard some things in Denver. What things, Orto? Daniel asked. Seems the territorial marshal is asking about Garrett. Carlos remembered the woman Garrett took last year. She just vanished. Her fate. But the truth hung heavy in the air. Sarah felt a deep chill, realizing how close she'd come. She almost met that same end. If Daniel hadn't saved her, if he hadn't fought for her. She shuddered. Daniel asked if the sheriff knew. Miguel spat on the ground. He knows, but Garrett's money keeps him quiet. The whole system is rotten, Miguel said. Maybe, Daniel replied, but we're going to use it to our advantage. He turned to Sarah and said, show them your hand. She held up her left hand, and Martha's ring caught the light. Carlos and Miguel stared, their eyes wide with surprise. Well, I'll be, Carlos said. When did you all get hitched? Last night, Sarah answered softly. Reverend Douglas married us. It is all legal and proper. Miguel let out a happy whoop and clapped Daniel on the shoulder. Boss, you should have told us. We'd have celebrated. It was a quick wedding, Daniel said, but a small smile touched his lips. It was a plan to protect Sarah. A plan, Carlos asked, looking from one to the other. Is that what you are calling it these days? That is what it is, Sarah said, trying to sound sure. But deep down, she wondered if that was the whole truth. Last night it felt like so much more. It had felt real. Suddenly they heard the sound of more horses. 6 riders came from the north, moving like a storm cloud. Garrett was in front, with Sheriff Coleman right beside him. 4 mean-looking fellas rode behind them. "Get in the house," Daniel told Sarah, his voice low and urgent. "Lock the door and stay with Grace." "No," Sarah said, her voice steady as a rock. "I am staying right here with you." Daniel looked ready to argue, but it was too late. The riders were already in their yard. Garrett swung down from his horse, a nasty smile on his face. "Frost," he chorused out, "time is up. Pay me or I take the girl." "I have your money," Daniel said calmly. He pulled a leather pouch from his coat. $300. "The full amount Harold Brennan owed you, based on your crooked claim." Garrett's ugly smile vanished. "That is my business," Daniel said, tossing the pouch to the ground. "Count it. Every last dollar is there." Garrett picked up the pouch, his hateful eyes locked on Daniel. He counted the money, then looked at the sheriff. "It is 300, he grumbled, "but that changes nothing. I still have a legal claim to the woman." "That claim of yours is worthless," Daniel said. "Mrs. Brennan is no longer available to be claimed." Garrett sneered. "And why is that?" "Because," Daniel said, "she is now my wife." He pulled the marriage certificate from his pocket, signed and witnessed. It was completely legal. The sheriff took the paper and read it. His face was a stone mask, but Sarah saw a muscle jump in his jaw. "It is legitimate," Sheriff Coleman finally announced. "A married woman cannot be claimed for her family's debts. She belongs to Frost's household now." Garrett's face turned a dark, angry red. "Well now, is not that convenient?" he snarled. "The timing does not matter," Daniel said, his voice cold as ice. "The law is the law. Sarah is my wife. You have no claim on her. You married her just to cheat me," Garrett roared. "I married her because we wanted to," Daniel said, his voice hard as nails. "Our reasons are our own. Now take your money and get off my land." Garrett's face went purple with rage. His hand twitched toward his gun, but Carlos and Miguel were ready to draw. "That's enough, Garrett," the sheriff warned. "You got your money, so the debt is paid." Garrett spat. "You know what she's worth? A healthy woman with a baby? I could have made 10 times the debt." His cruel words hit Sarah like a fist. To be spoken of like livestock was a bitter pill to swallow. "Get off this ranch," Sarah's voice rang out, sharp and clear. "You're trespassing," Garrett sneered. "You think being Mrs. Frost is going to protect you?" "I know it will," she said, clutching Grace. "And I know about your other victims. That woman who disappeared? The territorial marshal is asking a lot of questions." Garrett turned white. "You don't know anything." "Oh, I know enough to cause you trouble. You come near my daughter or me again, and I will tell him everything. I will testify. I will make sure everyone in this territory knows exactly what you are." They stared each other down. For the first time, Sarah felt a real solid power. She was Sarah Frost. She had a home, a husband, and the law at her back. She was not property anymore. Garrett saw the change in her and faltered. "This is not over," he blustered, but his voice was weak. "Yes, it is," the sheriff said flatly. "Stay away, or I will arrest you myself." Garrett snatched his money pouch and spurred his horse away angrily. His men followed, looking mighty relieved to escape the tension. The sheriff turned to them, holding the marriage certificate in his hand. "This was all done in a hurry, ma'am. Are you absolutely certain about this?" "I am not being coerced," Sarah said, standing tall right beside Daniel. "I made my choice freely, and I would make it all over again." The sheriff looked her over for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, then. Congratulations." He tipped his hat. "Mrs. Frost, you let me know if you ever need a thing." "Thank you, Sheriff," Sarah replied. After he rode off, a quiet peace fell. Daniel stared at the paper, Sarah held her baby, and a new life began. What had just happened? They'd won. Garrett was gone for good. "Well, we did it," Carlos said, finally breaking the silence. "Y'all really did it," Daniel said. "That hard ride to Denver made this happen. Thanks to all of us." Sarah corrected him. "We did this together." Miguel just laughed. "We're a good team. The Frost Ranch family." That word, family, felt like a warm blanket to Sarah. She looked at Carlos and Miguel, then at Daniel. She looked down at little Grace, sleeping right through it all. This was her family, chosen by heart, not by blood. "Come on," Daniel said. Let's get inside and celebrate this. They spent the afternoon in the warm house, drinking coffee that Carlos had spiked with a little whiskey. They talked and laughed, finally able to breathe after surviving something so awful. Little Grace was passed from one set of loving arms to another. Sarah watched her daughter smile at these kind, rough men. She felt something special and strong taking root right there in that room. As evening came, Carlos and Miguel headed out, teasing Daniel about married life. When the door closed, the quiet house felt different, more intimate. "I need to thank you," Sarah said softly, "for the money, this marriage, for standing up to Garrett." "No need to thank me," Daniel said, adding wood to the fire. "We're partners now, husband and wife. We look out for each other." "Is that all we are? Partners?" Daniel turned to her. "What do you want us to be?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I don't rightly know yet. It all happened so fast, but I don't regret a single bit of it. Not marrying you, not coming here." "Neither do I," Daniel said, stepping closer. "Sarah, I meant every word of those vows. I want to build a real life with you, a real family." "So do I," she whispered, touching her ring. "But I need time to trust all this, to trust that it's real." "Take all the time you need," Daniel's voice was gentle. "I am not going anywhere." They stood close, the firelight dancing between them. Sarah felt a pull toward him, something more than just gratitude. It felt like something that could grow into love. "Grace needs to eat," she said, breaking the spell. "And I ought to start supper." "I will help," he offered. They worked together in the kitchen, finding an easy rhythm. Daniel peeled potatoes while Sarah mixed cornbread. They talked about simple things, like fixing the barn and what to buy in town come spring. It was the kind of talk a husband and wife have, and it felt right. After dinner, with Grace asleep, they sat by the fire. Sarah mended one of Daniel's shirts. He read to her from a worn book of poetry. "Read that last one again," she asked. "Which one?" he asked, surprised. "The one about home, about finding where you belong." He found the page and read the words about a long journey finally ending, about a heart that knows its home. When he finished, Sarah's eyes were misty. "That is how I feel," she said quietly, "like I have finally come home." Stopped. "Me too," Daniel said, closing the book. "After Martha passed, I was just a ghost. I worked this ranch because a man has to work. I kept breathing because you have to survive. But I wasn't really living. Now with you here, I feel alive again." He looked right at her. "It's because of you, Sarah, and little Grace. This old house finally feels like a home again." Sarah set down her mending. "Daniel, I have to tell you something. I'm just so scared. Scared this is too good to be true. That you'll wake up and change your mind." "I won't," he said firmly. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. "Sarah, I lived alone for 5 long years. I know what lonely is. What I feel with you and Grace here, that's peace. That is what home feels like. I am not giving that up. Promise me," she whispered. "Promise you will be patient while I learn how to trust all this." "I promise," he said, taking her hand in his. "For as long as it takes, Awam." They sat that way until the fire burned down to embers. At her bedroom door, she turned. "Thank you for choosing me at that auction." "And there was never anyone else, Yara," he said. "From the moment I saw you, it was always you." She took those words to bed with her, a shield against the cold. The winter passed gently. It was filled with small, precious moments. Daniel teaching her how to handle a rifle. Carlos showing Grace how to make music with pots and spoons. Miguel singing soft lullabies. They spent long evenings by the fire, slowly learning about each other. Sarah learned Daniel had a dry wit that could sneak up on you, and he learned that she sang softly when she thought no one was listening. He also learned she checked the locks every night and sometimes cried softly in her sleep. They didn't rush anything, they just built trust one day at a time, with small kindnesses, like a hot cup of coffee or a newly mended shirt. Spring took its sweet time coming that year, but when it did, the world bloomed. Green shoots pushed up from the mud, and the pastures were full of newborn calves. The whole world seemed to be waking up, filled with sound and new life. And Sarah realized she was carrying Daniel's child. She told him one May evening, as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice steady in the quiet air. Daniel's hands went still. He looked at her, his eyes wide with surprise. "Are you sure?" Yes. Then he asked the one question that showed his true heart. How do you feel about it? Are you scared? Daniel asked. I nearly died having Grace, Sarah admitted. And I know your mother. I know the risks. We'll find the best doctor in Texas, I swear it, he said. But Sarah just took his hand. I'm scared, Daniel, but I'm also so happy. I want our baby. His face broke into a grin so bright it could have lit up the whole prairie. Our baby, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah, thank you for this gift. Thank you, she whispered back, for being a man worth building a family with. He pulled her close, ever so gently. Sarah leaned into his strength, feeling a peace she'd never known. This was her home. This was her family. It was a life better than anything she had ever dared to dream. Their son arrived in January with Mrs. Chen helping. It was a long and hard labor, but Sarah was a fighter. She made it through. Daniel had paced the floor for 12 straight hours, with Carlos and Miguel right there beside him, until he heard Sarah call his name. He burst into the room to see her propped on pillows, exhausted but beaming, holding a tiny precious bundle. A son, she said, her voice soft. We have a son. Daniel knelt by the bed, just staring at the little miracle. He's perfect, he whispered. What should we name him? Thomas, Daniel said without a second thought, after your first husband. He deserves to be remembered. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. And Jacob, she added, for your brother. Thomas Jacob Frost. It's perfect. Daniel gently touched his son's little hand, and the baby's fingers wrapped right around his. Hello, Thomas, he said softly. I'm your father, and I promise I will always be here for you. The years went by in a happy blur. Grace grew tall and fearless, a natural with horses. Young Thomas was quieter, but just as steady as his father. Then came little Martha, named for the woman who taught Daniel the meaning of family. The ranch thrived. Daniel and Sarah were a team, building a legacy that would last for generations. Carlos and Miguel became doting uncles to the children, the solid foundation of their little family. Every now and then, Sarah would think back to that awful day in the courthouse, standing on that auction block. She remembered holding Grace tight, certain her life was over, feeling nothing but pure desperation. Then she'd look out at her life now, at Daniel teaching Thomas, at Grace reading to Martha on the porch. She'd see Carlos and Miguel laughing, and she'd feel a wave of gratitude for the beautiful life they had all built together. What are you thinking about, darling? Daniel asked one evening, as they sat on the porch swing he'd made. The stars were just starting to pop out over the mountains. Just about how far we've come, she said with a smile. About that day you bid on me. He pulled her a little closer. Best money I ever spent. You know, she said, it's funny. I don't really remember the bid. It was all just a blur of fear. But I remember the moment you promised to be a husband and a father. That's when I thought, maybe I can survive this. Oh, you did more than survive, Sarah, he said, looking at her with all the love in the world. You thrived. We both did, because we chose each other. Daniel kissed her forehead. Every day, darling. That's what makes this real. The evening wind carried the sweet sounds of home, a child calling for water, a horse in the barn. These were the sounds of a life built on love and a promise. It all started when Sarah Frost was sold, a baby in her arms, and a cowboy made a vow. He promised to be a husband to her and a father to her child. In a world that saw her as property, they carved a home out of the pure wilderness. They built a family where there had only been loneliness, just by choosing each other every day. And that, my friends, is the unbreakable heart of any true marriage.